Apostolic Church, wherever you are in this world today. I bring you greetings from Ireland. You know, it was from this nation centuries ago that the gospel was carried back into Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Ireland was known as the land of saints and scholars, and as I'm sure you know, the saint best remembered was St. Patrick. Now, not long after Patrick came to Ireland to preach the gospel to the pagan population, he made preparations for the celebration of Easter, and it was customary at that time for Christians to light a bonfire at Easter in honor of Jesus, the light of the world. And so Patrick set up his fire on top of a hill, and he made it so large that it could be seen for miles around. But the local pagan tradition, it really said that nobody should light a fire at that time before the king. And so the local pagan priests, or the Druids, were furious. The penalty for lighting a fire before the king was death. And so they informed the king that if this fire was not extinguished, the person who lit it would rule over all of Ireland. And that night, the king was not able to extinguish that fire. And what the Holy Spirit lit in this nation that night has not been extinguished since, the light of Christ. Now, on this Pentecost weekend, we are praying for such fires to be lit again in nations all across the world. We're praying for churches to be mobilized, Holy Spirit outpouring, and lives changed. And I want to briefly share with you something to encourage you as you pray for each of these desires. First of all, churches mobilized. The mobilization of the church is the life of Christ. The mobilization of the church is the life of Christ. In Him we live and move and have our being. In Him we are mobilized. We're not mobilized apart from Him, for in truth we do not have a life apart from Him. Believers do not just live for Him, we live from Him. Now, whatever we, the church, do in our generation, our mobilization must be birthed of His Spirit. For that which is born of the flesh is flesh, but that born of the Spirit is spirit. Now, what does that mean? It means that the father of our mobilization must be the love of God. Guilt and shame, condemnation and comparison have so often in my life been the fathers of my mobilization, and yet all they have ever conceived and birthed through me were works of the flesh, self-effort, religion. The last thing my nation or yours needs is religion. They need revelation. The mobilization the Father desires is that which is fathered by His love, which is why the Holy Spirit mobilizes the church in one way, by pouring into our hearts the love of God. And that brings us to our second point for prayer: Holy Spirit outpouring. He pours in that there may be a great pouring out, the pouring out of His love into this world. And the vessel He has chosen and appointed to pour Himself through is His body, His church. But for that body to be mobilized to serve the world, His love, His life, we must first learn to freely receive what has been freely given. You know, if we ask the Lord today, what must we do to be mobilized to do the works of God? Would He not give us the same reply as He did in John 6:29? The work of God is this, to believe in the one He has sent. You know, as Jesus mobilized His apostles and sent them out, almost the last thing they heard Him say was, freely you have received, freely give. How are we to be mobilized to serve this world in love, to wash their dirty feet as Christ washed ours? Only by receiving the same mind that He had when He knelt to serve this world in love. And John 13 verse 3 tells us what it was that Christ knew that mobilized Him. It says this: Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under His power, and that He'd come from God and was returning to God. And so He got up from the meal, He took off His outer clothing, He wrapped a towel around His waist, and He began to wash His disciples' feet. I pray today for a great outpouring across the church of the mind of Christ, the spirit of sonship. For church, we have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who comes from God, that we may know the things freely given to us by God. For truly, if he has spared not his only Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him freely give us all things? You see, the final part of our prayer is for lives changed. When did he change our lives? Was it when we were at our best, all prayed up and churched up and had reached some level of righteous living? Is that when he gave his life to us? Or is his love not radically different from the love of this world? For did he not demonstrate his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us? In this world right now, there has been a storm called COVID. And like that fierce northeaster gale that drove the Apostle Paul's ship aground, this present storm has also stripped us of our best laid plans and much of the resources we have come to rely on. But we have a God who turns all things to the good, to those who love him and are called according to his purposes. Jesus said, there is something that storms always do. They always expose foundations. They expose the foundations of what we have been building on. Have we been building our lives, our hopes, on ourselves and what we will do for him, or on Christ and what he has done for us? Our last point of prayer was for lives changed. And I want to leave you with a picture of what happens when by his Spirit the church begins to see that even on the day we appear to this world stripped and beaten, we still possess all things pertaining to life and godliness. This picture is from Acts 16. Listen to how Paul and Silas were mobilized by the outpouring of God's Spirit within them, leading to lives changed. It says, then the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. And when they had laid many stripes on them, they threw them in prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. And having received such a charge, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. But at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's chains were loosed. I don't know what time or even what day it is, wherever you are in the world right now, but I can tell you what time it is in the heavenlies. Church, it is the time of God's favor and the day of salvation. And no matter how restricted or stripped or beaten we appear in this world, we can rejoice today. For he says, in the time of my favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. And right now, church, the Spirit of the Lord is upon us, because he has anointed us to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent us to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty all those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. And in every generation, by the power of that proclamation, the proclamation of his grace, churches are mobilized. There is Holy Spirit outpouring, and lives are changed. So let us too sing up, church, in our darkest places, and we too will find that in our generation, every earthly wall and chain and lock will break open before the life of him who still walks right through the toughest wall, the human heart. God bless you.